Hello and welcome back to Ronnie the Reader. Today we are going through my March wrap-up. Now this wrap-up is going slightly later. Normally I have been releasing videos on Tuesdays this year, and this video is coming out, I think, on a Friday closer to the end of the month. It's still not quite the end of March, but I don't know if I'm going to finish any more books for the rest of the month, so just going to go ahead and wrap up today's video. Or this month's reading. And truthfully, I only have 3 books I've actually finished in March, but I do have 2 in progress that I do want to talk about my journey with so far. And then I also DNF'd 3 books this month. So I'm going to end up discussing all of them. So we're going to go through first the books that I read, and then the books I'm in the middle of, and then finally my DNFs. So let's go ahead and get started and jump right in. So I finished 3 books, and you have actually seen all 3 of those books, and they are the books that I finished for the videos that I released this month. So the first book that I actually ended up finishing in the month of March, starting with Something in the Water, that ultimately was a 3.5 star. The book is following a young couple who gets married and goes on vacation to, I actually forget, like a French Polynesia, South Pacific island. They go on vacation there for their honeymoon, and essentially they find this like floating duffel bag in the water, and then that kind of kicks off the story from there of trying to get into the duffel bag, what's in the duffel bag, going from there. And ultimately, I think, like I said, I gave the book 3.5 stars, and looking back, it probably was more fun than like a 3.5 star rating. The reason I ended up giving the 3.5 star is because I thought the book was definitely a little too long. I definitely thought that the back half of the book was just a lot less interesting than the first half. But then also the first half took very long to get into the setup. I think like the characters finding the duffel bag and like going on that journey, I think is at like the 25-ish% mark. It was a long journey and felt a little too repetitive sometimes. And then the ultimate payoff and the ending of the book was exciting and fast-paced, but pretty predictable in the long run and pretty predictable in the end. And I was kind of surprised because I feel like I've seen this book talked about a lot, and it was something that just kind of was blowing people's minds, it seems like. I feel like every time I've heard this book described, it's something as like, you'll never see the twist coming, it's super unpredictable, there's just a lot of frantic high energy. Well, I definitely agree with that. The twist aspect and the ultimate plot aspect, I thought was exactly what you would be thinking of for a book of this nature. So I definitely would read other Catherine Steadman's. I am interested in Catherine Steadman's release that's coming out later on this year. So I'm probably going to end up picking that one up. But yeah, this one, 3.5 stars, good, fine, time, but not something that is going to be on my favorites list or that I will be, thinking about much more longer in the future. The second book that I ended up finishing was The Night of the Storm by Nishida Parekh, and this follows a Indian American woman who is living in Texas after she recently has divorced her husband and moved to Texas. That is where her sister lives. And the book is set in 2017 over Hurricane Harvey, which is a big hurricane that hit the kind of southern part of the United States, specifically Texas. Did get hit really, really hard, and it was a pretty devastating hurricane. So the book is set over essentially the first night of this hurricane and kind of what happens when this family gets together, because you have our main character, Gia, staying with her sister and her sister's husband. Gia also has a child, and her sister has a child as well, but then additionally her brother-in-law has a brother and a wife who comes and stays with them as well as his mother. So there's a lot of people in the house, a lot of going on, and it's kind of like a locked room thriller-ish type. And I'm normally really into that kind of stuff, but ultimately this book is much more about the dynamics of the characters and exploring like the family dynamics in an Indian American family and being a woman in America but of Indian descent, and what that means for you and your culture, and just kind of ultimately what it means to kind of be independent for yourself for the first time and exploring those personalities and not being able to rely on others and feeling like you have to rely on yourself the entire time. So those were interesting aspects. I think the book, because of that, feels much more literary fiction than genre mystery thriller fiction. While there's definitely mysterious elements and thrillery elements, just from the nature of the setting and kind of the ever-growing tension and impending doom of being stuck in a house during the storm, the ultimate mystery and plot of the book was pretty secondhand in the background and pretty lackluster in the ultimate ending. So it's not something that, once again, I'd probably be thinking about. I did end up giving it 4 stars overall because I thought it was a well-written book and it did explore some interesting dynamics. And obviously, as like a white man who's lived in America all of his life, reading from other perspectives, of different cultures and, of immigrant cultures and what that feels like is always a little bit interesting just inherently because it's so different from my lived experiences every single day. So I did care about Gia. I liked Gia as a character. She did get a little annoying at times and it felt like she was making the wrong decisions for the purposes of the plot to move forward and for her to be painted in a bad light the entire time. And they didn't necessarily feel like real choices a real person would be making. But once again, I've never been in a Indian American woman immigrant situation, so I truly don't know. But ultimately, this was good and satisfactory, but just not something that I will be, once again, kind of returning to or thinking about a lot. I definitely would recommend it. But I think if you read mystery thrillers a lot, it's probably just not a good mystery thriller. It's probably more of just a better kind of high-octane literary fiction, family dynamic, family drama story. All right, and then finally, the last book that I actually finished in March is Murder Road by Simone St. James. This is a horror mystery thriller book that was just released. Obviously, I gave this one 4 stars. It's Simone St. James' latest release, who is pretty well known for her books at this point. And ultimately, Murder Road is following another couple named April and, oh, I forget the husband's name in this book. Maybe James? I don't remember. But essentially, they are driving to this isolated resort town and they end up getting off a highway and onto this kind of deserted back road in the middle of this random weird town. And they come across a woman who has been stabbed and they ultimately take her to the hospital, but she is pronounced dead, and then they're caught up in the investigation of this. And it turns into a little bit of a true crimey investigating the history of this road and the mysterious deaths, because this is not the first one that has happened on this road. I talked about this in the video, but I think ultimately what just didn't work for me in this book is kind of the supernatural elements. All of Simone St. James all of her books have a supernatural element to them, and I just struggle to really stick the landing, or I guess that's a weird way to phrase it, but the landings of the book or the endings of the book have a hard time just sticking really, really well with me, because I typically, in a mostly realistic story, want there to be a realistic explanation. And while there is, to a certain extent in this one, the actual answer to what's happening is still rooted in a supernatural type element. And so it's just something that never, I think, is going to be able to get 5 stars for me, because I just don't think it's something that connects with me as a reader in general. And I'm glad to know that, because I do want to try to read more horror this year in general. I've been trying to read more horror the last 2 years, and I feel like I've not been super successful in that, just because I don't know where to start. I don't know what to pick up. I don't know if supernatural horror is directly for me in my outside life of reading, of movies and TV shows. I'm actually more of a fan of slasher horror. Typically, I love the Scream franchise, all of the big, slasher franchises, Scream, Halloween. Other horror franchises that I am into are things like Final Destination, where there is obviously this weird looming supernatural element of death being present. It's my goal to kind of find out more what I'm looking for in the horror franchise or the horror genre this year. And that has nothing necessarily to do with this book, other than it really kind of helps me really solidify that feeling in myself. So I definitely would recommend this book. It's a good book, especially if you like Simone St. James and if you like these kinds of stories. I think it's good. I think it has a coherent, interesting plot. There are exciting elements. There are definitely twists throughout. And I read this book, or I listened to it as an audiobook. I listened to all 3 of these books as an audiobook. And Murder Road I finished in 1 full day. It was a super, super quick read. So I definitely recommend it. But those are the 3 books that I've actually finished. So moving on briefly to the books that I'm currently reading. So I did start The Vegetarian by Han Kang last night. And I picked this book as part of a book club that I do with 2 of my friends. I've talked about it before. We pick a book about every month or so. And so this was my personal selection. It was my turn to make the selection, and we got horror as the genre. So I ended up picking The Vegetarian. Started it as an audiobook. It has been difficult for me to get into it so far. So I think it's going to be one of those things where I just kind of have to get through it. But the writing style of this book is very distant in a way that's making it hard for me to connect. And obviously that probably is just maybe a culture thing, because this book I think was originally published in Korea and has been translated to English. I know it's a translated work, but I actually don't remember specifically where the book is originally published or originally from. I'm gonna try to get through that. Another book that I am having a difficult time to really get into is Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep by Philip K. Dick. This is a classic sci-fi. It was the inspiration and what Blade Runner was adapted from. So I've always been kind of interested in this, and I'm trying to get back more into sci-fi as well this year. Yeah, sci-fi, classic. The reason I'm not been able to finish this, I've been reading it for over a week, is because I tend to be able to focus only enough for a chapter a night. And it's probably because I'm reading it as I'm done the day, laying down in bed, ready to go to bed. So, it's just difficult in that sense. To kind of get into it, and I think I need to change that up. But hopefully I'm aiming to finish that sometime this weekend, maybe possibly, we'll see, crossing my fingers. But yeah, I'm currently in the middle of those 2, so hoping to finish them soon-ish, hopefully by the end of March. But I do have kind of a busy next 3 days for the end of the month coming up, so we will ultimately see. And then I did, like I said, DNF 3 books. I have talked about a couple of them so far. So the first one I DNF'd was Radiant Heat by Sarah Jane Collins. I DNF'd this book in my new mystery thriller releases video, and ultimately I just wasn't really connected to the characters in this one, and it just was not enjoyable. I listened to 50% of it as an audiobook, and I couldn't tell you really a single thing outside of the general premise, because I just, at a certain point, I don't even think I was paying attention really to the book, truly. And so I ultimately DNF'd that one. I did also DNF just a book that I was reading, not for any particular video, but that was Best Man by Sydney Krager, I think is the author's name on that one. And I started this, once again, as an audiobook, listened to the first 3 chapters, and just really did not like the main character and their vibe. And so, yeah, I was like, I'm not even going to try to do this. Like, I'm really trying to, like I said, force myself this year. If I'm not connecting with a book, just giving up on it, DNFing it, because I can always come back to it later. It's not like I need to be finishing those sorts of things. And then the last book that I DNF'd, which I'm really upset about because I was really excited for it, was No One Can Know by Kate Alice Marshall. And this is a new mystery thriller that is following a woman whose parents were murdered inside of their childhood home, and now her and her fiance are running onto difficult financial times, and they ultimately move back into this home because they don't have to necessarily pay for it, and it's a home, and because dumb choices her fiance made, they were going to be homeless, which I think led to my dislike of this book. I just did not like any of the characters, and I've always said I don't necessarily need to like a character to like a book or to get into a book, but I need to not be annoyed by my character's actions, decisions, and way of speaking. And that comes into heavy play with our audiobook narrators. And I just don't think that I connected with this audiobook narrator, which I'm pretty sure I have listened to other audiobooks that she has narrated before. Only about 15% of this book. It was pretty early on that I made the decision because it had been 2 days since I started it, and I had no desire whatsoever to get back into the audiobook. So I just returned it from my library and added it to my DNF list. And, I said before also that I would probably return to Radiant Heat in the future. But after reflecting on it, I don't think I would return to any of these three books that I've DNF'd in this particular month. I just don't think any of them were for me, and maybe it's just my current mood. So we'll see, in the future. Like, obviously, never say never, but I'm not saying any of these books are bad. I don't think any of them were bad necessarily. They just were not connecting with me and were not the right books for me in that particular situation. So that is everything, though. Those are the books that I've read, currently reading, and have DNF'd in the month of March. So overall, I think it's a successful month. I think I learned a lot. Maybe it's not the most successful in number of books I've finished or ratings of books or anything like that. But I think I learned a lot about my reading taste. And as someone who was really struggling mentally and with mental health since like 2021, and my reading has been really hit by that the last couple of years, I almost feel like I'm a new reader again, trying to rediscover what I really like and what I'm looking for in books. And so even though I might be DNFing more and I might be rating books a little bit lower than, I would like, I just feel like I'm in that self-discovery, self-journey era again of finding out what books I want to prioritize and put forward for myself. And so that's what I'm looking for in this month, and that's how I'm taking away the month of March. So let me know if you read any of these books, what you thought of them, if you are planning on reading any of them, or if I swayed you to not pick up or pick up a book any one way or the other based off this video. And yeah, until I have another video soon, which should be on Tuesday, normally going as scheduled, I will talk to you then. Bye.